Jason, thanks for joining us, my friend. How are you doing today?
Great, thank you. I'm excited to be here and excited to talk to you guys about Bitcoin.
Absolutely. We generally start off here talking a couple firehouse stories, but yesterday was something special. I think Jan and I we walk by each, we pass in the morning shift change. So these guys are outside. There's a softball game going on between the cops and the firemen. I think is that this weekend coming up, Dan? I don't even know when it is, but anyway.
Yep.
So they're outside throwing a softball around, and it becomes quickly like a dick measuring contest. Who can toss and launch the softball furthest in the back parking lot? So I walk out there in sandals, ready to go home, and they're just lobbing this thing. So I wait my turn, get a hold of this thing, and crushed. Well, I wouldn't say I crushed him, but I beat him in sandals.
Yeah.
I had to walk away. I walked away because I know that someone's going to beat it, but that was the high point. I had to walk out.
I gotta admit, it was pretty alpha. He just waltzed out there. We were all warmed up. He grabbed this thing and just sent it, Jason. And
flew it over the moon. Gone.
Text the rest of the day from Jim saying that he beat me and I'm a cuck. So, I don't even believe it though.
He can't replicate that environment though. That walk off, and then you just hopped in your truck, flicked everyone off, and went home. It was a thing of beauty.
Like a mic drop. It reminds me. I saw somewhere like a good measure of overall fitness is to like kneel down and throw a basketball as far as you can, and you just sort of like hurl it. But you have to be on your knees. And it surprised the hell out of me, right? So, of course, as soon as I found this out, walk over to the gym, grab a basketball, like, how far can I get it, right? And I was like, at that moment, I was probably as fit as I have been. And I got it, like, to the opposite free throw line. I was like, all right, that's good. I'm going to walk away from it.
That sounds like more distance.
We're going to bring that to the firehouse. This is a test of virility, boys.
Yeah,
right. Exactly.
Get on your knees.
That is a new contest right there. I mean, I sent this tweet yesterday morning after, and I said something to the effect of, "This is the only career where grown-ass men in their 30s, 40s, and 50s vehemently debate and then contest who can throw the furthest, run the fastest, swim the fastest, lift the most."
We had an arm measuring contest a couple of months ago, just randomly. Like, no one plans this stuff. It just kind of happens.
And the thing that I love it, too, is that it's debated more than it's done. So before the contest happens, like now that the softball throwing is a thing, well, now all the houses are going to do it. And it's probably going to, there's going to be tape out in the parking lot so you can go the furthest. But more time will be spent at lunch and dinner on the whiteboard mapping out who probably is going to win. Maybe some bets will be cast. Derivatives market, basically, on
it's just odds, like Caesar's sports app, right? The betting.
Exactly.
Exactly. Well, these are all things easy to measure, right? So it's not, you're like, all right, go out and run and throw, and we'll just measure it.
Talk is cheap. Talk is cheap when you're doing basic contests like this.
It is, man. You got to do the work. You got to prove
Jason,
it.
Tell us about yourself for those of our audience who are not aware. Who are you? Where are you? What do you do?
I am I'm in the state of Connecticut. I am a high school math teacher. That's my day job. That's my fiat mining job. Ultimately, like, that was my ambition as a kid. I just want to grow up and be a teacher. And then I decided, okay, math is the thing I want to teach, and have been in love with it. Been teaching for a couple of decades now. And then got into Bitcoin a little while ago and ended up writing a book, which really is meant as an educational resource for people, Progressive's Case for Bitcoin, which is really designed to attract a bunch of pre-coiners. Yeah, there it is. Pre-coiners who don't know a lot about a lot about Bitcoin and want to learn more. I don't know. I'm looking forward to football season. And so that's me, right? Like I just decided to sort of leverage my experience as a teacher and say, all right, how can I educate and inform people about this really important thing that's important to me, and I think important to the world.
Yeah. How did you get exposed to Bitcoin originally? Where did that stem from?
Yeah, like everyone, I had like a false start, right? Like I discovered that I could mine Bitcoin on my laptop in like 2012 and set up set up an account to do that, and then like never logged in ever again because I had no idea what the fuck it was. I was just like,
Oh, man.
what, you know? So I logged in years later after I actually like really got into it, and it was like 0 Bitcoin mined because I just forgot about it. All I knew was that it was harder to mine Bitcoin over time, and I just thought that, I didn't know what that meant. So that was my false start. My real Bitcoin journey started. A buddy of mine said like, hey, you should really look into this. You should buy some Bitcoin. He sent me a link. And I did. I bought $20 worth of Bitcoin. So this thing is still around. Like it must be, interesting, right? And it's like, I'll buy $20 worth. And then I very quickly realized that I had no idea what I was investing in. Like where did that $20 go?
Right.
And it just sent me down a rabbit hole to learn. Like I remember it was like bath time with my son, and he was like splashing in the bath, and I'm like watching a YouTube video trying to learn about blockchains. I was like, no, I'll rinse your hair out in a minute, like, and I was just sitting like on the floor in the bathroom, like watching my phone, like trying to learn about what is a blockchain and what is YouTube. Or what is Bitcoin? Jeez. So that's how I started. And then I said, all right, well, I want to learn more. And I got intrigued by the math and the technology behind it, and then never stopped learning.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, as a testament to the book you wrote, Josh, we'll basically tell people our trick. If we see you in person and you say, hey, I have to come on the podcast, we may lie to your face. We'll be like, sure, yeah, it sounds like a great idea. But we won't have you on here unless we actually find what you're doing interesting. So we got your book. We read your book. I had a great time with you on the panel. We were just like, this book's awesome. It's so well researched. It's so well distilled. We were saying before we click record, I think it could just be rephrased a normal person or a moderate's case for Bitcoin. And it's very high on my list. It's hard to rank these, but entry resources for a huge cohort of people in my life, where, no disrespect to other resources because they're awesome, and each person from different walks of life is going to gravitate towards something different. But for the individual that's going to be turned off by, say, the Bitcoin Standard, this is a much more approachable version that goes from square one, and I think addresses a lot of more holistic issues that normal people in the population, not from libertarian or right-leaning backgrounds, latch onto, which we'll get to more in this discussion. And I think that's much needed in Bitcoin. But I just hat tip to you, extremely well done. Especially this is we have an appreciation for how hard it is to get things done on the side of a main career. Even doing this podcast in addition to firefighting with a family it's taxing. Sure. So to put this thing out in addition to being a math teacher, I don't know how you did it, man, but very impressive.
I don't think that it's necessarily, I mean, anyone from a libertarian background or conservative could read this book too and take tons from it. So people listening and hear the name of the book, you shouldn't let that pigeonhole it into something you're not interested in just because of the name. It's definitely got a lot of signal for anybody across the spectrum.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate you guys saying that, because really I'm just trying to make the case for Bitcoin as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. And I realized that there wasn't really a resource out there that spoke to people in their language. And, whoever reads it, even if you're not a progressive or a liberal or left side of the spectrum, like maybe people who are, and if you want to orange pill them, then hopefully the book has something for you along those lines also. But yeah, I mean, I'll tell you how I wrote it. I mean, Anne had a job I used to be head of my department, and that's a really hard job. And I got the idea for the book while I was like department head, and that's like nonstop work and stress and problems and fires you have to put out, like metaphorical fires. And then like I literally like hung my tenure for that like ended, and then next day I started writing the book. And I just woke up. My wife was very clear, like, I love that you're writing a book, but like it can't take away from the family too much. So we need to be thoughtful about that. So I woke up at 5 a.m. Every morning and wrote, until it was time to get the kids packed up for school. Right. Like, so I woke up early mornings. I hate doing that, but I woke up early every morning to work on the book. And it was just a passion project. I honestly, when I started, I didn't think anybody would ever hear about it. Nobody would ever read it. And of course, like it's gone on a different path, which I'm grateful and humbled by for sure.
Good for you, man. I was also going to say back to a previous comment about if you are someone that's triggered by the title, which by the way, us shilling this book over the last few months, we've seen a few of them. People that even just
Yes.
hearing the name of the book,
They
clearly
get triggered.
having never read a page of it, are immediately tearing it to shreds. If that's you and you feel triggered by the name, all the more reason to read it, to get out of the bubble that you're in.
For sure. And I think that's one of the most important things that you speak about in the book is these echo chambers, and I resonate with that strongly. I try to expose myself as much as I can to a wide range of views because we're all living in our own cacophony, our own echo chamber. That is, these algorithms on the internet, they're all they understand that there's two things that you're going to click on, something you agree with or something you vehemently disagree with. So there's clickbait, there's all this crap out there to just enrage you, to get you to engage more. But I mean, on Twitter, especially as you kind of curate the people you follow, people generally follow people they agree with and they resonate with. So we all kind of build these own echo chambers naturally for ourselves. It's incredibly important to step outside of that, get yourself some exposure to other points of view. You must, I mean, so being on the progressive side of your ideology in Bitcoin, you must have these conversations quite often. What is your go-to to maybe introduce people to your perspective versus the more conservative mainstream and Bitcoin perspective? How do you approach?
Yeah, I mean, what you say about these echo chambers and this political bubbles is really important, right? Because now I feel like I have the vantage point of being in two different political bubbles or two different echo chambers. It's not like I would love to be able to say I transcended it, but I haven't, right? I'm in this Bitcoin echo chamber and I'm also in like sort of liberal politics echo chamber. And what shocks me is the sheer amount of things that overlap, right? Like there is like conflict that doesn't need to exist on some of this stuff, right? It's just sort of the people in charge want us bickering about little things. And at the same time, there's plenty of important like concepts where we need to have like honest debate and like authentic dialogue about it because not everybody's going to agree. That's hard to happen when you're just sort of like fighting with one another. What I say in terms of like the Bitcoin space and people like you were saying, like they get triggered by the name and it's like, like, oh, you can't be a progressive and into Bitcoin, all of these things, right? I've heard it all. I think that the message that I would like to get out there is, what do you care more about? Do you care more about people adopting and learning about Bitcoin, or do you care more about them agreeing with you on these other 10 political lists that we're supposed to be fighting about? Because I care more about the Bitcoin and making sure that people can learn about it, feel comfortable in the space, adopt it, and just sort of continue their journey. And that was the motivation behind the book. It wasn't as if I looked at the Bitcoin space and was like offended as a liberal and was like, oh my goodness, this is horrible, we need something. It was really as an educator and saying like, Bitcoin is kind of a complicated technical issue that is like wide ranging in terms of what you have to learn. And really, in order to learn it well, you need to feel comfortable and have a resource out there that speaks to you. And so the book was not written as like this crazy liberal who like felt like we need to change the Bitcoin space. It was just, hey, how do we educate new people? How do we make new people feel comfortable learning about something that's really scary? And that's what motivated the book. So it's not really like, I'm not trying to change anybody's mind. If you're into Bitcoin, like I'm not trying to make you more liberal. Like I just want people who are not into Bitcoin already to be comfortable learning about it.
I think that's a really mature perspective. And the very fact that someone from your shoes with your dispositions gave Bitcoin the time of day is sort of a testament to your thinking ability. Because let's be dead honest, and I'm not saying that this is inherently a bad thing about Bitcoin, but it is not just right-leaning in social media, let's say. It's quite right-leaning, in my opinion. Okay. And so if you're coming from a different perspective, there are pretty it's rough water. The waves are pretty choppy on the surface. Underneath, there's a beautiful reef that everybody can gaze at, but it takes somebody that's willing to put that snorkel on, look underneath and see that, because it is a lot to take in with someone from your background. I'm going to move this into a question, putting you on the spot here, maybe a little bit tough to answer off the cuff, but for somebody that's from a pretty right to far right perspective, what would you say is most commonly misunderstood or misrepresented about progressives and liberals? Let's burn down some straw men for somebody that hasn't even interacted with someone like you for 10 years, right? They've built this filter
yeah.
bubble, all their friends and family, anybody that ever says anything, they react to, like a couple of these interactions we've been a part of together on Twitter.
Yeah.
What do you say to that person?
Sure.
What give us sort
Maybe
of high
they're
level.
just like the kind of person who's has never sat down and actually listened to the other perspective without getting, rage quitting and walking away, or just not even engaging. Like, you get the opportunity here to talk to them.
Beautiful. Hi, everyone. I think I'm Jason, and I'm very friendly. I think that the number one thing I hear that just doesn't ring true for me, but I think people like to, when they're going into it in like a combat stance, right? They're going to fight me and they're going to tell me that I'm an idiot or whatever. It's simply just this assumption that because I call myself a progressive or I'm a liberal person, that like I blindly accept anything the government tells me, and I blindly want the government to be bigger no matter what. And therefore, if those things are true, then you can't envision a world in which I would support Bitcoin, because it goes against those basic assumptions. And those assumptions are completely wrong. There's plenty of people on the left side of the political spectrum that look at the world the way it is, don't like what's happening. They look at some of the things the government is doing, don't like some of the things that the government is doing, and want to change it. And I think that there's a really rich history of people on the left side of the political spectrum, like standing up against authority, telling a government, like, we don't want you doing this. And so, like, to boil it down to that cartoon, which is just like, you are a statist, you want the government to be as big as possible, you want them to do everything for you. Like, this is just not true. There's way more nuance. Like, I'm not saying we agree on everything, but certainly, like, if that's your vantage point, then you're not going to really kind of see the nuance at all, right? It's just going to be well, Bitcoin fights that, and that's therefore, like, you can't like Bitcoin. So I'd say understanding that people on the left side of the political spectrum take a look at, like, some of the things our government is doing, and they don't like it, right? It's not like we blindly just want the government to be bigger and bigger, or do whatever they want, or control us, or anything like that. So I just say, open yourself up to a more nuanced conversation. Find out, like, the things that I don't like about our government are different than the things that an ultra conservative right-leaning person might not like. But it's not like I don't have a distaste for, like, my government or my representatives or the political process. Like, there's actually overlap there, and there's conversations that could be had.
Have you thought about mining Bitcoin, but you thought that maybe the equipment was too expensive, or that running your own miner might be just a bit too technical? Maybe you thought it'd be cool, but the cost of energy where you live just makes it pointless. This is where HeatBit comes in. You can kill 3 birds with 1 stone with this device. It's a Bitcoin miner, a heater, and an air purifier all in one. It's a plug-and-play device that could not be easier to operate. It has the latest 5nm chips that make it one of the most efficient Bitcoin miners in the world. HeatBit also operates quietly. Good luck selling the idea to your wife that you're going to plug in a bunch of Bitcoin miners in your basement that operate at the volume of a lawnmower. Not going to happen. HeatBit operates silently while keeping your significant other warm and cozy. HeatBit cares about your marriage. So, if you want to mine Bitcoin and remain married, order a HeatBit and keep warm while it pays for its own energy bill. Use code BCB to receive 5% off a HeatBit. That's code BCB. For sure. And it's a pretty common thread that people on either side of the aisle, they acquiesce to their own political party, whether or not they think it through. It feels like very commonly. People just necessarily, and they're very tribal. So they're in their group, they're in group. And when the in-group is doing something they may not, if the opposing party was doing exactly what they're doing, they'd have a huge problem with it. But because it's their group, it's their in-group, they're going to allow it to happen without really much, fanfare. And the other thing that I think is, this is an obvious statement, but it's worth saying. The mainstream media on either side is always presenting the craziest ideas from the opposing view. Like, you're seeing the craziest, right-wing conservatives, and you're seeing the craziest left-wing liberals. Right. And then that information is propagated as if that's normal on the other side, which it very, very often is not even close. Right.
And I think that goes to the thing, right? Well, who do I want to debate, right? Like, do I want to debate a reasonable, nuanced individual that has thoughts and ideas, or do I want to debate like a crazy lunatic that disagrees with me on every single thing? It's easier to debate somebody who's insane, right? So it just sort of feeds that bias that you already have, and like the news outlets on both sides know that, and like they're very profitable in sort of peddling this fear of the other side, and all you get to do is pick like which flavor of fear do I get to buy, right? Do I get to buy the blue fear? Do I get to buy the red fear?
Have you guys seen the South Park episode where they have the shit sandwich and the giant douche? And that's political. Yeah. Those are the political choices you have every election period. It's a great episode. If you guys haven't seen it,
I haven't. No.
It's a great
it sounds
episode.
like real life, but yeah, sure.
Yeah. Two sort of basic high level comments from your book that I think are worth sharing. The first one is, it goes back to what you were mentioning a second ago, which is there's a lot of crossover between bubbles or camps that people wouldn't expect. I've had this quote here from you on page 173 that says, "It is a progressive ideal to fight against bullies taking advantage of the vulnerable, especially when the bully is able to game the rules to their benefit. Bitcoin is progressive in exactly this way." Okay, this is something you could read this sentence to every liberal progressive. You could read it to every hardcore Bitcoin libertarian, and they would align on the fact that the system is not oriented for fairness and equity from the bottom up, right? It's top down, and that's a problem. Huge amount of overlap there. The second thing, just to dispel myths here, and I'm going to share my screen because I was thinking about this when you were talking a second ago, of this sort of straw man that liberals just want to spend tons of money. Okay, well, let's pull up this chart. You guys see this? You guys have this? Yeah, okay. Now. This is from...
I love this chart.
This is from Lavish's, one of Lavish's recent pieces. Right. And it's basically showing you U.S. debt rising and red and blue for which parties are responsible. They are both responsible, folks. So if you're sitting there thinking liberals spend and conservatives don't, you just don't have a good read on how the budget works in the United States. Right. And I also think your book gets the wheels turning for folks about where is this money going. An example that I've used recently, and I'm not saying I'm for paying off all student debt. I think it's up for debate. I can see both sides of the argument, but people that are so adamantly against it, and then you ask them, do you have any idea how much money has been funneled into fixed income treasury markets over the last 10 years? You have any clue? You compare that number in the trillions to the number needed to pay off student debt, and they're like, holy shit. Like there's so much liquidity entering the system. And I think people like you are starting to ask the questions, which are very valid. Is this money being best allocated on the forever wars and on all the monetary policy and all this stuff? Is there a way we can siphon this into other areas? So I think this is where the liberal progressive social programs dynamic gets more complex, is when you actually lay down the budget and you look at the numbers of where money is going. And I'm not saying we don't have an entitlements problem. We do. We have an overspending problem. We have a programs problem. But the problems with spending stem way further beyond that. Any follow-ups or comments on that? Because I think that's a powerful theme that just for folks that don't understand the numbers.
Yeah, dude, the numbers just on the the forever war you mentioned. The estimate from, I don't know if this is from the Pentagon, it's a number that came to my head recently. It was $7 trillion or so we spent in the 20 years we were engaged in Iraq, Afghanistan.
Right.
That is a staggering amount of money. I mean, it's just not fathomable how much money that is to most people.
And I think that's right. Like, I think that a lot of people are sort of like penny wise and pound foolish because they latch onto this idea, oh, how dare you pay off student loans? And I'm not, whatever you feel about that, but just in terms of scale, the things I would like to get rid of the government doing cost a lot more than that, right? And you can say, all right, well, is it right or wrong to do that? Is a different question, but like it costs pennies on the dollar to solve that problem, or, quote unquote, solve it. And I just think that it's, what they're doing is they're getting us to fight about like little stuff like that instead, and then letting the system run as it is, right? Like I think that a lot of people like to refer to Democrats as tax and spend, and really it's like both parties are just spend, that's all they're doing, right? So they're just printing money. It's like, and the Democrats are idiots because they let this label, tax and spend liberal, right? Well, it's like the Democrats and Republicans are just spending. Like nobody's taxing, it's just printing the money, and it's it's going out the door. So I think that perspective, like how big is the debt? Like why are these things happening? And then what are I'll speak for myself. Like, I don't think that we should probably have kids going hungry to school, like, because they can't afford the school lunch. Like, that probably shouldn't be happening. And like the price tag for that is like a fraction of some of these other things. But
that's like
that's
January. That's like January QE. You know.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right.
If that, if that.
So like,
you know,
we're like, and then who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? Right. Like, oh, I want to feed kids who are poor and can't have lunch. And they're like, well, you're spending too much money. It's like, we're all just bickering about like the fringes of the budget and not really what's happening. So, you know,
is it true that progressives use nonstick pants?
I don't. They must, right? I mean, if you've been on Twitter, it's like cast iron, stainless steel. No, I mean, I'm just Teflon family.
Just Teflon.
You know, because I vote for Joe Biden and like a Teflon. That's it. It comes in the mail automatically.
So yeah, I thought one of the principles or one of the tenets of your book that was best aimed at progressives or that situation, or that aspect of them, is the energy consumption of Bitcoin. And you dispelled a lot of the thought around, you know, number one, is energy consumption necessarily bad? Should we be moralizing energy consumption? And then you went through a list of, you know, a whole bunch of ideations about how Bitcoin's using, you know, 55% of it is green energy. And let's talk a little bit about the perspective of progressives when it comes to Bitcoin and its energy use. Let's just talk about that generally, because I think that was a really, really keen way to present that to the progressive.
I think obviously for lots of reasons, this is the most important piece, like at least in this moment of time, because it's a critique of Bitcoin that resonates with people on the left side of the spectrum. And I think it's important to at least acknowledge there are certain things for anybody, and this spans the whole political spectrum. It's not just like liberals who feel this way, but like climate change and damage to the environment and energy consumption are all things that resonate with like a progressive environmentalist person, and to be honest,
just people in general.
Well, and people in general, but I think that for people who like I'm friendly with, I'm colleagues with, I'm friends with, like the critical thinking can kind of stop, right? You have these shortcuts, these categories. Okay, well, that's bad for the environment. Therefore, I don't need to think about it anymore. It's bad.
Yeah, you put it in that bucket, and now it's just there, and it's no longer relevant.
And it's actually it's like an emotional reaction, because it makes you feel good to be able to say like, oh, well, that's bad for the environment, and I'm a good person, so I'm going to not like that thing. Right. And what I'm trying to do in the book is just get us past that emotional response, that one-dimensional thinking about like energy use equals bad, and think about what's the energy being used for. Is it is it incentivizing renewables? Is it itself incentivized to become greener over time? Like, is there societal benefit for using this energy? It's not just sort of wasted and burned off. And so all of those are more complicated questions. And I think that the real struggle is there's a 30-second soundbite that says Bitcoin is bad for the environment, therefore you shouldn't like it. And the response to that is never 30 seconds. You have to understand how energy grids work. You have to understand the limitations of renewables. You have to understand how Bitcoin operates. So like you're trying to combat a 10-second, 30-second soundbite with actual nuanced, detailed information, and it's just hard. It's a challenge. It's hard to do. So that's what I'm trying to do in that chapter in the book, and in the conversations that I have with people in real life.
Yeah, like anything, but especially Bitcoin, it takes just tons and tons of time and exposure to material and reading and researching, or it is very difficult to catch the nuances of these things, of this thing specifically. But I thought you did a really good job in a succinct chapter that kind of spread that out and made it an easy to understand, digestible thing.
This is such an important idea, though, because there are some very key prerequisites to the energy conversation. You can shortcut people to certain Bitcoin realizations, scarcity, hard money, that sort of thing. When it comes to energy, you can't really, like, to your vocation, you cannot bring someone into a calculus class that hasn't had algebra 2 and all the stuff in between. It's just, it's not possible. They will not understand a fucking word you say from the front of the room if they haven't taken the first classes. And for me, Bitcoin has been an exercise in starting to learn just the basics about how global energy grids and distribution work. And I think a lot of people miss the very first building block. And this is, I'm going to pick a little bit more on progressives right now, but it's across the spectrum of just thinking that energy is bad. Energy is not bad. The expansion of energy is the reason that our species is at the position we are in today, right? Abundant energy usage and production is the engine of human progress. And if you were to map GDP and global poverty and energy usage per capita, which you can find on it, you're going to see that those correlate 1-to-1. And so this is just a very complex issue. The challenge here, gentlemen, is that simple narratives win. We very well may have a greenhouse effect and global warming and some major climate issues, but just to shut it down and just to say, stop using hydrocarbons, sounds sexy, sounds great, doesn't work. And a lot of the downsides to that move, yes, they exist in the first world, and we've seen that over the last few years with first world nations making some mistakes, decarbonizing earlier than they should. But a lot of these consequences head out to the third world. Because as we've moved into the industrial age and beyond into the 21st century, the reason first world nations are where they are is because of their ability to harness energy. And when you just say, it's bad, we can't use this, and you tell that to African nations and South American nations, they're the ones that are going to be most prominently disenfranchised. The point here is we have to find, if we are going to decarbonize, we need to find solutions that work and incentivize this move, and Bitcoin steps in marvelously. Why don't you do just a high level outline of why Bitcoin is potentially such a profound and important free market catalyst for renewable energy production?
It's it reminds me of this sort of anecdote where you have Bitcoin miners using the potential to use methane and burn off methane in a way that is a non-rival consumer of electricity. You're taking methane and processing it in a way that's less harmful for the environment. And all of that should be happening by the letter of the law already, like in landfills. And the infrastructure to set that up is very expensive and very time consuming and very complicated. And so a lot of landfills that find themselves in that middle ground where like they're not big enough to monetize the electricity they produce, just don't do it. And they don't do it even though it's like by law they should, and they're facing like fines because it's hard to get caught not doing it because the people who are in charge of enforcing it are overworked, right? And so what you have is this incentive that says we're going to punish you if you don't mitigate this methane, and it's still landfills aren't doing it. Now, contrast that with the situation where you have a Bitcoin miner coming in and says, I'm going to use this methane. I'm going to mitigate the methane. I'm going to monetize the electricity that comes out of it. I'm going to give you money back. We're going to, mine Bitcoin and actually incentivize that build out. It helps with the infrastructure. It helps with sort of the initial capital investment. And what you're doing is you're motivating that move by giving a carrot instead of a stick, right? The stick doesn't work. The penalties, it's so unlikely they're going to get caught. The penalties are worth it in the end because the infrastructure to build out these facilities is so high. So instead of that stick, you just bring out the carrot. Say, do the right thing anyway. This is the right thing to do for the environment. And you will get rewarded or, for that in a financial way. And you're also happen to be mitigating this methane, which is way more harmful than CO2 for our atmosphere and all of that stuff. So I think that's just one kind of example to say, all right, let's do, like you said, a free market solution. Like, let's start talking about rewarding the people for doing the right thing. Bitcoin does that. They step in. A Bitcoin miner is location agnostic, is able to use electricity that's not being consumed for anything else. A lot of people think, okay, energy use equals bad because that energy should be going to a hospital or something. And the truth is, like, Bitcoin is a non-rival consumer of electricity at the margin. So you're not taking electricity away from orphanages or anything like that. You're just actually using electricity that would have been wasted, anyway. So
right. And this is, again, a misconception of energy. Like, they have to produce, these plants are not designed to like throttle down. They're producing X amount of energy. If it's not getting consumed, it's literally getting wasted. There's a good example of that. I believe it's ERCOT in Texas. There's a shitload of Bitcoin miners there. They can ramp up their capacity. They can turn it off instantly. So they're consuming the base load that they're producing. But so in the summer heat, when everyone needs their air conditioning running, the Bitcoin miners simply throttle down or turn off. And the energy is then, placed for the consumers to use it to use air conditioning in their houses. But it works relatively seamlessly, and it can be done instantaneously.
And the wonderful thing is that Bitcoin mining is like uniquely positioned to do that well. There are other industries that use that demand response. Say, okay, you need this electricity, let's give you back some, and that's very beneficial to the grid and the power producers and the power companies. They actually incentivize that and want that to happen. But Bitcoin mining is the best at it. We can, Bitcoin miner can respond like in real time to real demand. And I think a lot of people just don't realize the very basic fact, like when you produce electricity, it needs to get used right then. Like we don't have storage capacity, right? So like if you want a bunch of solar panels and wind turbines out there and it's producing a lot of electricity, either it gets used or it gets wasted, right? And so I think Bitcoin mining can step in exactly that way. And a lot of people don't. I'm being serious. A lot of people across the political spectrum don't understand how electricity works. So they think, the more solar panels, the more wind turbines, the better. That's green energy. It's sustainable. There's a lot of like misconceptions there. But what they don't realize is like any energy that gets produced in that moment needs to be used. And if you want to overbuild the solar and the wind in order to have your entire grid more green, then you need to have somebody coming in and incentivizing that, monetizing that electricity and actually using it instead of just sort of grounding it into the ground.
Has to be overbuilt. That is a very important point for sustainable energy. You can't, because these things can't be counted on to work all the time. The wind's not always blowing. The sun's not always shining 100%. There's cloudy days. You've got nighttime, obviously, for solar panels not producing. So you have to overbuild the capacity to a massive extent. And the only way to do that reasonably, as far as I can tell, is having Bitcoin take up the load that would otherwise be completely wasted, because these things are not cheap. These giant windmills are hugely expensive. So are the solar panels. And it's this is just the only way to reasonably sustain these things or build them out and have them be profitable from day one.
Yeah.
And the people at the power companies know this, right? The people that I've spoken to have already been saying that, like, their long-term strategy, they're already investing in land and property that they know they can build these renewable energy sources on, right? Like solar panels and wind turbines for 5-10 years down the line, because they know that there's going to be a demand for this, quote unquote green energy. And they've admitted to me, like behind closed doors, like Bitcoin mining is the perfect load for us. It's a high responsive load that's totally flexible. Like that's exactly what we need in order to make those projects run, because we're buying land out here that we know we're going to put solar panels on in the future. There's nobody demanding that electricity now. So in order to actually like invest in that infrastructure to build that renewable energy, you need a customer that can actually respond in real time, and Bitcoin mining does that. So the people who are owning and working for and running these power companies know exactly what we're talking about already, and hopefully more of them can get turned on to Bitcoin.
Folks, when a fellow firefighter, family member, or friend asks us where we buy Bitcoin, we point them to Swan. It's the place Josh and I have dollar cost averaged into Bitcoin for years. At Swan Bitcoin, you can set up automated Bitcoin savings plans as well as execute instant purchases. They serve clients of any size, from firefighters to institutional investors, and an account is startlingly easy to set up. I've watched a fireman do it on a smartphone while sitting in a recliner in less than 7 minutes. Swan also offers Bitcoin IRAs. You can start or roll over a traditional or Roth IRA with enterprise-grade custody, attentive service, easy onboarding, and transparent fees. Lastly, Swan will be hosting the Pacific Bitcoin Festival October 5th through 6th in Los Angeles this year. The two of us will be attending and speaking. Come join us. Visit pacificbitcoin.com for tickets and visit swan.com for details on everything that Swan offers. Ladies and gents, the fact is that Bitcoin remains decentralized because its ledger is distributed all across the globe. The thousands of computers that keep track of who owns what and ensure the accuracy of the Bitcoin blockchain are the nodes. You ought to be verifying your own transactions and balances, as well as enforcing the consensus rules yourself. The software and hardware we use to run Bitcoin nodes is StartOS by Start9 Labs. With StartOS, you can fire up a full Bitcoin node in a very easy plug-and-play fashion, but you can also do way more. Start9 gives you optional capabilities to run a full-blown private server, allowing you to easily and incrementally level up and opt out of today's increasingly centralized and alarmingly censored cloud computing model. Just as Windows and Mac OS made it possible for anyone to run their own personal computer, StartOS makes it possible for anyone to have their own personal server. Run a Bitcoin node, run a Lightning node, run a NOSTR relay, control your own photos, videos, and messages, and much more. Check it all out at start9.com. Yeah, Jason, we had Eric Hersman on here a few months ago. Love the conversation. By the way, this is one of the most painful invites we've turned down, Josh, because of real life getting in the way. Was Hersman literally invited us to Africa for the launching of a project to go big game hunting, and we couldn't say yes, Josh. We just couldn't make it out there. Hersman, one day.
That's too bad.
The point is that he came to mind because he talked about some of these renewable projects. I think it was in Kenya. I have to listen back, but he was just talking about how these things are being built out, can't be monetized for years on end, right? You're building a wind farm, you're 7 years from getting 1 cent back, and Bitcoin can step in. And this gets to the whole point that we've covered here today, and we've covered ad nauseum on the show in the past, which is that what Bitcoin really does, if I was to distill it, is it overcomes bad economics of renewables, right? You have people like Saifedean Ammous walking around talking about how bad the economics are of renewable projects. Well, he's largely right, because these things need to be so drastically overbuilt, right? Josh, as you said, energy isn't consumed necessarily exactly when the sun shines or the wind blows. So you're talking about needing tremendous amounts of redundancy, huge overbuilding, which is bad economics. Here comes Bitcoin to solve this problem on the free market. I sent this tweet the other day that said Bitcoin is the most unique buyer of energy on the planet. A true free market catalyst for renewable infrastructure. It's eco-friendly not because of flimsy centralized subsidies, but because of real incentives. And this is what's important, because when you think long term and we go to just how society has been best organized over time, if it is all artificial scaffolding through subsidies coming from the government, it is going to be so hard to stand this stuff up in the quantities that's required. It's just going to be, and there's this thing emerging on the free market. I also think we could spend a whole episode talking about why Bitcoin is such a unique buyer of energy, because I know for a lot of people, when they hear this, they're like, well, why can't other data centers do the same thing? It's because they can't withstand the intermittency. And you hit at this I think, in your book, talking about if you're Netflix or Amazon or Google, you can't just turn a switch on and off. You can't just cut people off. Whereas in Bitcoin, you can. You can say, I'm mining right now. Yeah. Oh, now energy is required back on the grid. I'm not. And that requires a digital, location agnostic, monetary asset that has value, that's going to be here for a long time, right? That energy utilities can latch on to, not for a year because some crypto bro pushed it on YouTube, but because it's got real underlying stability in the financial system. You start, my point here is you start getting the list down and you're like, this is the only thing that can buy energy in this way.
For sure. And when you talk about these subsidies too, the political winds blow, right? Like the subsidy that's here today might be gone tomorrow because a new politician, a new regime, they completely change us up. Not to mention that political ideations are inherently a temporary thing. It's just like a human construct. Whereas, I mean, you could argue anything's a human construct, but what I'm saying is Bitcoin gets us down to more base level physics, where this thing is a free market piece that is kind of just has built itself at this point almost free of humanity. Like it's kind of this, it's like a wild force of nature that is just going at this point. And it's not likely to end, much less likely than any political movement or political ideations.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's, the example that I have that you mentioned in the book, which is, like Netflix is totally fine running at a short-term loss to make sure that you can watch the TV show you want to watch exactly when you want to watch it, right? They're not shutting anything down because there was a heat wave in Texas and people need air conditioning, right? Like, and so I think that, the Bitcoin is, as you're saying, like a long-term base layer, like getting back to the physics, like the actual atoms running through, like the electrons moving. And the more people can learn about why Bitcoin consumes and purchases energy differently than any other industry, is really, that's an important thing to keep learning about and just keep drilling down, because I think that you're going to appreciate the complexity and the nuance of like, what does it mean to be renewable? What does it mean to be green energy? Why isn't using energy just equal waste or bad? Those are really important questions to ask. And I think really, if you want to just start with like, what's the motivation? Understand why is Bitcoin different than everything else? And that's what's going to kind of help you learn all of those other things.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the themes I feel like we have to spend some time on today is the time you spent in the book talking about why Bitcoin should be inherently apolitical. You have this quote, you say, writing a progressive's case for Bitcoin is as absurd as writing a conservative's case for hammers. And you also say, if we allow Ted Cruz and Elizabeth Warren to control the narrative, Bitcoin will become hyper-partisan. So you're basically saying it shouldn't be partisan, but it's becoming that way. Unpack why it isn't, and then what concerns you about current moves towards partisanship.
I think that it's an important point to make, and I appreciate you bringing it up. I think that Bitcoin as itself, like by itself, is a tool, right? It's just something that we can use better money. It's a monetary tool, and it doesn't need to be political at all. And the book is really meant, and my sort of description and my whole like thesis is people should feel welcome coming into the space and learning about it, because there's a whole interdisciplinary thing you have to learn to understand Bitcoin in a way that's familiar and comfortable to people. But my hope is that 4 years from now or 8 years from now, my book is not needed because Bitcoin is just a thing that people use. Right now, I feel like it's needed because there's a whole like addressable market out there of people who consider themselves left of center, who hear only bad things about Bitcoin, and we need to get those people on board. So the way I like to describe it is that if my book is like actually successful in its mission, it will not be needed in 5 years. Like it just won't be needed because it will be silly. Like, oh, why talking about like it's like a progressive's case for electricity or something?
Yeah,
or a hammer.
Like it'll look stupid on shelves in 20 years. Right. That's our hope. Yeah,
let's hope so, right? And so I think that it's just let's get to the point where people can learn about Bitcoin, understand that it is a tool that can be used for whatever purposes that people want to use tools for. And then let's get everybody on board with educating themselves and understanding why it's important. And I just happen to pick like this political lens to do that through. But it's not like Bitcoin itself is not political. And I think that it's really important, the people who are hating on Twitter and like get so riled up about it. Like, I'm not trying to say that Bitcoin is better for progressives than it is for conservatives, or I'm not trying to say if you're into Bitcoin, then you should be a progressive. None of that. I'm just trying to provide an educational resource for people that helps them understand Bitcoin in a way they probably haven't thought about it yet. And understand the problems that they see in the world, that they kind of agree, hey, here are the things I don't like about how the world is running, and then look at that through a new lens that they've never had before. So I think those are the goals. Ultimately, it's not a political thing. Like, and so like you say, hopefully my book looks silly in a couple of years, and that would be great.
Yeah. When you just back on the energy front for one last thing, because I think this is an important point as well. We talked about its use of energy, how it can, sustain or help propagate some renewable energy, but we didn't talk about why it is probably worth the energy as much as I think we may need to.
Yeah.
And we mentioned Africa and Gridless and what they're doing. They're being able to stand up some seriously high megawatt stuff that's in villages that could never afford these things to be built. And then there's the idea that you not only can they help sustain more civilization, more first world order type of civilization in Africa, where they're third world in many places, but it also provides people that have dictatorships ruling their country the ability to actually have a bank, which is Bitcoin. They are now banked. There's so many people around the world. I think it's even like 30% of people in the US aren't banked at this point.
Right. Yes.
So let's just explore that a little bit about why is Bitcoin worth the energy it's using? Even if it's not necessarily all clean energy, it's definitely worth it.
Yeah. And I think that's how I try to frame it in the chapter just to begin with. They say, all right, well, let's talk about what it's doing. Like let's talk about why it's important, and sort of having a censorship resistant, like no gates entry into using a monetary technology is important for people all over the world, like including the US, but really like think about the global south, think about people who are living under authoritarian regimes. Like there is a lot of good that can be done on this planet with that kind of money, and Bitcoin provides that opportunity for everybody. So if you sort of say, all right, I know that I'm using a lot of energy, and like, why is that energy important within the context of making sure we secure the Bitcoin network? But why is the Bitcoin network important? It's all of these other things. I want to do good things. I want to, help people stand up against dictators. Well, you need money that can't be confiscated and seized and funneled and all of that, right? So I think that I try to highlight, this idea that everybody maybe either intentionally or unintentionally moralizes the use of energy. And so there's things that we can agree on. Say, okay, well, this respirator is important to plug into the wall. And like, it's not okay to leave a light on when you leave a room. Well, what about the middle? Like, what is the energy being used for and why is it important? So I think that those are very important conversations. And it's hard to do because the energy chapter comes early in the book, but all of the benefits that we're talking about are sort of spread out through the rest of the book, right? So you kind of say, okay, let's continue to learn why Bitcoin is important, but for the moment, let's say, all right, well, we're allowed to use energy for important things, and we're not trying to waste energy, and we're not trying to use any more than it takes, and we want to be more efficient. But let's continue learning about why is it important to stand up to dictators, or why is it important to have a more peaceful world and a more transparent financial system.
I think you wrote something along the lines of even a barefooted hippie would agree that, powering a hospital is important. I got a kick out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So there's things that we agree on, right? I don't think any reasonable person, again, there's cartoon versions out there, but no reasonable person is like, all right, let's like turn off the carbon fuel like thing right away, like now, like let's stop it, because then our society collapses, right? So I think that have a reasonable, nuanced conversation. How do we transition away from fossil fuels if that's something you care about? And then you realize that Bitcoin is an important part of that. It's not the only solution. It's not the only thing that's important to consider, but Bitcoin is a really important part of that transition. And that transition for reasonable people, there's a lot of nuance and dialogue that has to happen.
Let's talk a little bit about the part of the book, and it's on this same theme of Occupy Wall Street. I think you talked about this with Pish too when you were on with him. I really like this section of the book, and basically saying there was a lot of beauty in that movement, but there wasn't a lot of firepower behind it. What did they get right? What were they missing? And what do you see echoed in Bitcoin with regard to those sentiments?
Yeah, I think that the approach that I take when I talk about it in the book is that the motivation behind Occupy Wall Street, like the message that it's sending, is not dissimilar to Bitcoin originally. Like in its inception, Bitcoin is a protest against the government's relationship with too big to fail banks, right? Like you can kind of think about what are we talking about in the Genesis block, and what is Satoshi's quotes and all of that. Like if you find yourself like, oh, I'm a progressive liberal and I think big banks are really horrible because they're abusing people and taking advantage of customers and all of that. Well, like Bitcoin's for you. And that's exactly what the message was from Occupy Wall Street, except Bitcoin has that staying power. It has like a real practical use case. It has the ability to bank unbanked people, or to put pressure on banks to act in a more transparent and fair way for their customers. And so all of those incentives are already wrapped into Bitcoin. And it gives, instead of just protesting, and I think that's important, right? Like you can raise awareness and there's good things to come out of protesting, but if you're only protesting, you're not affecting change. And so Bitcoin kind of is like the actionable part of the Occupy Wall Street movement, which a lot of progressive people are sympathetic to. They say, yeah, there's corporations, there's governments, there's like these big banks. I don't like what's going on there. And Bitcoin offers like an actual alternative that's like practical and applicable to their everyday life if they would only learn about it. So I think that that's a connection that hopefully resonates with a lot of people, because there's a lot of people out there that think that way.
Yeah, I think this back to crossover between groups. A lot of people in that more liberal camp that you're swimming in would be saying, we live in a 21st century environment where the rich and powerful call way too many of the shots. And as a Bitcoiner, people that start to understand this protocol and the breakdown of the current monetary system, they would say, that is the case. And a lot of that is due to fiat money, right? Because of money whose supply and price is at the centralized behest of policymakers, you have an environment where the rich and powerful control is exaggerated more than it would be on a harder money standard.
Right.
And so the more the monetary system is centralized, which it's been increasingly so for the last few decades, the more you're going to see this problem. And I think this is where, for me, my hope is for a lot of people that have been closed off to it, they can start to see that this gets to a base layer problem that's accentuated some of the inequality and power mismatches in society that a lot of responsible progressives are battling against.
I think it's also like we're both from either side of this. We're both seeing the same problem, which is like this crony capitalism kind of, and we both disagree with that. Maybe we view it in different ways, but these two ships passing in the night need to figure out how to meet each other and get this thing, figured out, because nobody on either side of this is for like the unfair inequality, the Cantillon effect that is going on from the top down here. We're all getting screwed by it. And it's like this divide and conquer. I don't even know if it's organized well enough to, like it's not like a centrally organized thing. It's not like a giant conspiracy to like split us all up and make us fight each other, but it's just like this human nature of tribalism that just naturally coalesces into people disliking each other on their face, and then maybe not organizing well enough to get at the big boss that is.
Howdy plebs, it is Dan here. I want to take a minute to talk to you about Crowd Health. What Crowd Health is doing in the healthcare space is nothing short of remarkable. If you're already familiar with Crowd Health, you can visit joincrowdhealth.com/BCB and use code BLUE for a tantalizing 3-month trial discount. As you probably know by now, the two of us are career firefighter paramedics. Nearly 70% of our calls are medical related, and we both rotate over to an ambulance. We're the first link in the chain in the healthcare system, and we see just how broken it is. Injured and sick patients stressed out of their mind, primarily worried about the incoming hospital bill. Crowd Health offers an extremely simplistic and workable alternative to traditional healthcare setups for a freaking fraction of typical premiums. It's essentially the decentralization of healthcare, leveraging the power of Bitcoin alongside healthcare crowdfunding to drastically uncomplicate healthcare and give back control to patients. Crowd Health negotiates bills for their members and finds them the best doctors and hospitals. Do yourself a favor. Visit joincrowdhealth.com/BCB. That's joincrowdhealth.com/BCB. And use code BLUE during sign up to receive a max discount crowdfunding request of $49 a month. Yes, $49 for the first 3 months. The Blue Collar Bitcoin podcast is brought to you by arguably the most legendary company in Bitcoin, CoinKite. They are the producers of the renowned Cold Card, the world's most trusted and secure Bitcoin signing device, built with a plethora of features fit for Bitcoin beginners all the way up to the most advanced of users. This device is a one-stop shop for your Bitcoin custody needs, and something the two of us have trusted for years. CoinKite also manufactures the Block Lock, a gorgeous e-ink digital display art piece sitting in the background of what seems to be every serious Bitcoiner on the planet. Block Lock can be programmed to scroll through key Bitcoin metrics including price, hash rate, next halving date, and much more. Boy, oh boy, will this thing look good in your living room or office. They're also the makers of many other security and fun products for all users, no matter their technical aptitude. Support our show and get a delicious discount on CoinKite products by following our affiliate link on the screen and in the notes, and using code BCB for 5% off the Cold Card.
Yeah, we need to prep for the boss battle. I think that you're right. And that's sort of what I've seen by looking at the Bitcoin space and sort of interacting with people who are complete normies and not interested in Bitcoin at all, despite my efforts, almost everybody sees the same problems, and they can kind of see how the world is unfair and how people get to take advantage of that unfairness and all of those things. It's just sort of the allocation of responsibility for those problems is different from different people. And so somebody on the left has a complete list of reasons why, like, banks are messed up, or, we have inequality that's like really extreme. And Bitcoin doesn't factor into it. And so, or like fiat money or the central bank doesn't factor into those explanations. And so I'm trying to say, through my book and through whatever conversations I'm having, saying like, I see the same problem that you see. Now let's look at the cause on a more base level. Let's look at it in a more, from a different angle than you're used to looking at it. And hopefully we can have those conversations, right? Like, I don't think that like the fiat base layer of money and the cancel on effect is the only problem, but I do think that's one that gets ignored by people on the left all the time because they just don't know it, right? So let's have a more robust conversation about the causes and then potential solutions for these things.
Right. That's an important thread to pull on, of not letting one marvelous thing be the solution to everything. This notion that Bitcoin is going to fix fucking everything, I think also sort of takes responsibility away from communities and countries and governments, right? Government's not going away next week. Okay, so this is I've engaged more recently with some of the libertarian anarcho-capitalist ideas. I think there's a lot of powerful themes there, but I think even they can agree that even if that utopian future were to kind of come to exist, right, on that and that perspective, the training wheels aren't coming off for a long period of time. So back to an example you provided. What do we do to make sure kids get fed in the medium term? Maybe Bitcoin in a more prosperous future helps us along that path, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't collaborate and vote and think through how we fix that problem next month and next year.
Yeah,
There's a couple words you used in the book numerous times that I think are worth filling in. First of all, you used the words open and flat to describe Bitcoin, about why it's important. And then you had this other section where you talked about why permissionlessness and censorship resistance are, quote, critically important to advancing a host of progressive values. When I read this, I thought through, I don't think most liberals would necessarily think that right away. Fill that idea in. Why are those rights in the digital age so important and so critical for money in particular?
Right. I mean, one of the big things that concerns me about society in general right now is people's willingness to give up privacy for convenience. So that's step one, right? People are willingly doing this. Step two is like, they don't understand the technology well enough. Like, even if somebody wanted to be very private online, I don't even know how to do that, right?
Yeah.
I probably would have written my name synonymously, or written the book synonymously if I could have, but I don't know how to stay secret. So I think that ultimately what, in some respects, you can see that the banking system as it exists excludes certain people. It does, like, there are people in America that are unbanked or underbanked and don't have the resources they need to access their own money or to transact in frictionless ways. Like, that's already a problem. You see that all over the world. There's billions of people who are unbanked and underbanked. So like, that permissionless, that openness to participate in the Bitcoin network is supremely important and could potentially help people access their funds, access their money, transact in a way that's frictionless, in a way that they just simply do not have right now. And I think that if you care about the betterment of humankind and like building up people's quality of life, like being able to use a monetary technology that is frictionless and free is absolutely important. And I think that the other thing that you can see is there's a lot of people who like to make themselves feel better by donating to charities. And okay, there's these hungry people across the world, I'm going to donate to a charity, but not realizing that charity is getting, censored by a government on the other side of the world. Funds are getting frozen, confiscated. People are becoming political, enemies because this stuff is happening to stand up against authoritarian regimes. Like, it is very important to have money that works and is not dependent on a third party approving a transaction or isn't susceptible to a government stepping in and seizing funds or something like that. So if you want to be like a do-gooder and like do good in the world, like, you need money that works. And Americans have money that works most of the time, but a lot of the people who need that help don't have the money that they need. So I think that those are kind of the tenets I'm trying to get at and make people really think about, if the audience is an American person who's, not thinking about this stuff regularly, start to get them thinking about, like, how does money work for you? How does it work for everybody else in the world? And is that fair? How can we actually help people who need it?
For sure.
And
I have been talking recently quite a bit about this idea that Bitcoin is inevitable. There's this cohort of people that seem to think I don't have to do anything. I don't have to engage. I can just put my head in the sand, not worry about this, sit on my Bitcoin for the next 20 years, and everything's going to work out fine, right? That's why I absolutely love this book, because I think the three of us would agree that this is not inevitable. Nothing in this world is inevitable. And it's very important for people of all views to be taking a look at this thing more seriously. And your book, I think, is going to do more good work on spreading this, making this Venn diagram a little larger in the center. Like, we're going to be able to spread this out, God willing here, to people that maybe would have never considered this before, and from some perspectives that you can provide that just make it easier for them, more approachable. And we need to keep working at this thing. That's why we do what we do here, because this is literally we've talked about this too, years ago. Like, we've got no coding capabilities. We don't know shit about how this thing works, like, by the numbers. We can regurgitate all the books, we've read, but like, if I had to go into Bitcoin Core and like figure it out, like, I'm complete lost puppy.
Josh, Josh and I will occasionally get like DMs and emails, Jason, where Josh and I know our way around. Let's not sell ourselves short. We've run nodes, we've started multi-sigs, we've done a lot with Bitcoin.
But we're not coders.
We're not coders at all, right? So it depends on your perspective of what technical means, right? To the average boomer, Josh and I are, running circles, but to someone that actually knows what they're talking about, we're clueless. But sometimes we'll get emails from people with paragraphs like I don't even fucking know what they're talking about. And basically my response is, just because we talk into microphones and have smart people on doesn't mean we have a clue. Like, you know way more about the question you're asking than I do. I'm completely lost. Yeah.
But I think to Josh's point, it doesn't sit well with me to say, okay, Bitcoin's inevitable. I think that, if you take fix the money, fix the world, like, there's a middle step there, which is like work really hard, right? Like, educate people, get people on board, do coding, like, if that's what you can do, like, help people set up their wallets, like, all of that stuff. Like, you can actually do that work. You can go and like help people that need helping, or help teach people like what you guys are doing. So
just copy the Mormon book. We'll just go door to door with the Bitcoin standard.
Put the Gideon Bitcoin Bible in every hotel room.
That's perfect, right? I leave my business card and for the book in hotels. But I think that you're right. Like, it's there's a lot of examples throughout history where the best technology, like the objectively, this is a better technology, A over B, doesn't get adopted, and there's a million reasons why that can happen, right? And so we need to be careful resting on our laurels and say, well, Bitcoin is the better technology, therefore it's inevitable. It doesn't have to be that way, right? And so, like, we should all be thinking in that lens. Like, what can I do to help promote, help make Bitcoin more secure, help make Bitcoin more widely adopted, change the narrative so it's okay for people to talk about Bitcoin and like not sound like a crazy person. So I think that we all need to be doing that, like those things, and that's critically important.
Oh man, I love that point, dude. Narratives matter so much. I mean, we've talked about it at length when we had Swenson on. That was a main thrust of the whole conversation. There are, as you just articulated, there are some great ideas through history that have not come to fruition because they didn't have the narrative propulsion behind them to get them out of the atmosphere. I mean, and that could absolutely happen to Bitcoin. I think there's a lot of diverse incentives and a lot of reasons Bitcoin's going to succeed, but this thing getting pigeonholed into certain narratives and belief systems and not expanding outside of it unnecessarily, as we've established in the show, is a problem. Like, one example would be, and I'm not here to pick on libertarianism because I think there's a lot of beauty in it. But if Bitcoin Bitcoin becomes overly libertarian, libertarian's very fringe, man. I'm sorry for the people listening. It's super fucking fringe. Like, there's not that many libertarians.
They don't know that because they only listen to each other.
Dan, have you read Atlas Shrugged, man? You haven't even read Atlas Shrugged. You don't know what you're talking about.
I'm on. For me, I just finished Saifedean's Principles of Economics, which is a wonderful roadmap to Austrian econ and libertarianism. I think there's so much beauty. I took a ton from it, but I'm just telling the audience, even though they may not feel that way in their filter bubble, it's a very small community. It's very fringe. If Bitcoin is totally trapped inside that fish tank, it's never making it out into the ocean. So this is why we're advocates of what you're building, because it's casting a much wider net.
I think that's, to me, like, if you're asking me what's the biggest threat to Bitcoin, right? Because I do believe that it will succeed, and I'm not saying inevitable, but I do think that, I'm betting on Bitcoin becoming the next thing that can help people and make the world a better place. And I do think it will succeed, but it's not guaranteed. And the biggest threat to it is because if it gets pigeonholed, right? Because I don't want Bitcoin to become one of those things that if you know that I like Bitcoin, then you know that I like these 12 other things, right? Like you can do the checklist. And there's a lot of things like that. I tell you how I feel about affirmative action or abortion or whatever the case is, right? Like I tell you how I think about those. You can check off all of the boxes. I don't want Bitcoin to get pigeonholed in that way, because that becomes like a left-right issue, or it's only this one fringe group, and libertarians are a fringe group in terms of size. It's not like, we can't take over the world if Bitcoin's only adopted by those types of people. So to me, that's the biggest fear I have, and the biggest threat to Bitcoin's success. And that's what I'm trying to address. Yeah.
And that cohort definitely was the nursery of Bitcoin. It was first computer nerds, super ultra computer nerds on the cypherpunk list who had that libertarian lean, and then I think it kind of broadened out into more libertarian circles, gold bugs, those kinds of, maybe I think a lot of younger gold bugs back in the day got into this, and they always have that predisposition for libertarianism. And now it's kind of jumping out of the nest here, and we need to make sure it opens those wings and doesn't hit the fucking ground at 60 miles an hour.
Right. Yeah. And the other thing is, if Bitcoin is as radically inclusive and significant as we suggest, it's going to represent all of humanity. So it is kind of like your kid growing up and leaving for college for people that have been in Bitcoin for a while. What it was when you got going in 2013 or 2015 or 2017 or 2020, it won't be that way in 2030. We're looking at something that has the potential to be that big of a deal. And so it's going to represent that level of diversity. It's that simple.
Right. What you're suggesting here is that Satoshi started Bitcoin with an orgasm? Is that the...
Exactly. The immaculate orgasm of Satoshi.
Right. Yeah. I can get behind that. That's a thread narrative we can do.
Yeah.
I think, to your point, it is absolutely true. If your goal is to have a world money that is accessible to everybody, then you have to be okay with everybody using it. And like the idea that you're just going to sort of write off my book or like people that I'm trying to educate because they don't fit in the category that you think, which by the way, those categories are sort of like fiat world imposed categories, like, and people are attached to them and they're important. But like, if you're just writing off a bunch of people because they don't fit what you think Bitcoin is, then you're not really working towards a world money for everybody. And I think that's what we should be working for. So that's, I agree with what you're saying.
Man, this has been spectacular.
Yes.
I mean, the orgasm alone, I think about like this idea that we don't know if Satoshi was a group of people, and now we're talking about like a group of people having an orgasm to start. It's great.
We don't know if it was a gangbang or just if it was a lifelong love, but either way,
the immaculate
consenting
orgy.
Adults. Anything is allowed. It's fine. The immaculate orgy for Bitcoin. Man, this is going to be this is the title of the episode.
Yeah, I think it might have to be. I think so.
Perfect. Yeah.
We could go a lot longer as is usual, but we won't. Appreciate your time. Give a handoff to whatever you want, Jason, as we close out.
Sure.
Here.
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate the chance to get on with you guys. I think I told you in person, Dan, that I've been a fan and listen to you guys all the time. It's how I learned about Greg Foss. So like indebted to you guys. And so thank you for the time. I think if people want to learn more about the book or to buy it, you can go to my website, which is bitcoinprogressive.com. It's a great way to get in touch with me. I'm also on Twitter. Or X, C. Jason Maier is the handle. I will be at Pacific Bitcoin and Bitcoin Amsterdam. So if people want to see me in person, get their book signed, or just have a conversation, then I'll be there and welcome people coming up to me and saying hi. So
You're going from one to the other, hopping on a plane from California basically over to Europe, huh?
Yeah, and not like I didn't have any conversations with my spouse about this, but it'll be fine. It's totally good. It's totally fine. So I'll be in both of those places and eager to meet people. So if you see me walking around awkwardly, just say hi.
Awesome. It's funny you mentioned the Foss origination when you first heard him, because I remember very vividly the first time I heard Foss. I wonder if, Dan, do you remember the first time you heard him?
It was on Pish's show.
Yeah,
first time
me too.
I heard him, yeah.
I remember what I was doing. That guy's got such a character. Like, you can't forget the first time you heard Foss.
I at least remember being at a Chipotle picking up an order when I was listening to that episode.
I was putting barnwood. I was listening to Pish putting barnwood on a wall in my house. I remember very specifically what I was doing. All right, cool. Yeah.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you, Jason.
Thanks, Jason.